Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Williston-Richmond Rotary. We still have Lisa as a guest, She's not quite an official member yet, but we're heading that direction. And I will let Sally introduce our speaker. But first, I'll have Jude up to do our Rotary Minute.
Don't need that. Okay, yeah. Like everybody, I think we're all kind of concerned about what's going on in the media and what we should believe and what we shouldn't believe. And with AI coming along, everybody's concerned. So I wondered what the Rotary was doing about it, whether they had any programs and everything. And I came upon this one, which I thought was really interesting. It deals with students between 11 and 13 years of age, and a lot of you deal with mentoring. Media literacy is crucial for healthy societies. Rotary members are teaching people to think critically about what they see and read. The first day of school, a new school year, can be disorienting for any teenager, but your first day at Virginia Hall High School is even stranger than most. Your grandfather claimed he used to be a spy. Your sister accuses some students of locking her in a closet, and everyone says a monster is stalking the hallways. What's happening? Is any of this true? Instead of rushing off to fight the monster, you read these rare events in the school newspaper. You ask yourself, do these sources provide multiple pieces of evidence for their claims? Could they possibly be earning money because of what they're saying? Do their stories cast a negative light on people who disagree with them? You ask all these questions because you're actually playing a video game designed to increase your media literacy. Co-created by Anahita Donia, a member of the Rotary Club of Newport Beach, California. The game Agents of Influence is being developed to help 11 to 13-year-olds think critically about what they see on social media and in the news. We're teaching kids to understand media bias, logical fallacies, and confirmation bias. We teach them things like reading closely, tools that you can use to determine what to trust online, says Dalmia, the founder and CEO of game developer Alteria Incorporated. Dalmia is a third-generation Rotarian and says the game's approach was inspired partly by Rotary's four-way test. The first question is this the truth? And there's a reason that that's the first question, she said. If it's not the truth, you cannot make a strong judgment call based on any other questions because you're starting on an unstable foundation. An unstable foundation is one way to describe the current state of media landscape. Experts say we're exposed to far more media than ever before, and that includes both misinformation, which is unintentional untruths, and disinformation, which is deliberate falsehoods meant to mislead people. Although many outlets are not responsible and credible, figuring out what to believe can take time and effort. People are aware of this problem, and they say they want to become savvier about the media they consume. A study released this year found that about 7 in 10 Americans were interested in learning how to better distinguish between truth and false information online. But media literacy is more than just separating fact from fiction. We need to be able to judge things like what is the bias behind it and who created it. For instance, independent voices can be crucial in places where media organizations lack funding or are restricted by repressive government. When Rotary Peace Fellow Tom Sitho realized his hometown in Zimbabwe was ignored by major media outlets, he launched a community radio station. Then he founded the Zimbabwe Center for Media and Information Literacy, teach people to think more critically and tell their own stories effectively. He believes the two skills are intertwined. We tell citizens how to arm themselves against disinformation and misinformation, he said. The center also trains citizens, journalists, and other content creators teaching skills like fact checking and ensuring balance in a story. The threat of artificial intelligence. Even as he trains an army of storytellers, Sitho worries that the arrival of artificial intelligence will make it easier to create and spread disinformation. For unsuspecting citizens, it's creating a lot of challenges, he says. It becomes very difficult now to tell whether a piece of content is true or false, especially if it's in the form of videos or images. It's something that is really challenged even for the professional journalists. Some believe the key is educating younger media consumers. Erin McNeil meets many students through her job as CEO of the US-based nonprofit Media Literacy Now, and she's heartened by what she finds. AI is definitely making it harder to identify good and credible sources, she says, but she says people can use the same skills to analyze human-generated and AI-generated content. Young people are so creative and smart. We're educating them so they can rise to the challenge, she says. They're going to find solutions as long as they're given the skills and the education they need. That same belief animates Stelmia as she continues to develop and promote agents of influence. She has presented at games in numerous Rotary clubs and hopes Rotarians everywhere will encourage their local schools to use it. This started as a passion project, she said, but there was a huge demand from parents who were concerned about how social media was shaping their kids' perspectives and interactions with the outside world. The resounding feedback we've gotten is, can I have this for my kid who thinks TikTok is a reliable source of information? I thought that was really clever, and I thought it might be something we might even think about with our connections that we have with the school. In this article too, we actually had 4 different sources that you could use to authorize what was true and what wasn't. So I just thought it was pretty interesting. If we end, whoop.
Here, I'll take that. Thank you.
Seeing as we work with the kids in the schools here, but I'd kind of like to learn it myself.
Sally, are you ready to introduce our speaker?
So before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to welcome our other guests who have come since Elizabeth announced guests. Kim Marcy is here, Dean Jensen, and Reed Carr. Welcome. It's good to have you. And they've all been drawn by Debbie. So Debbie New, a teacher and anthropologist by training, launched Vermont Community Thermal Networks in 2022 to put thermal energy network solutions on the table in Vermont with a focus on maximizing local control and community benefits. She has coordinated coalitions and working groups dedicated to decarbonization of the thermal sector. I may be tripping over some of these words for the past 10 years, including leading outreach to labor leaders, engagements with institutional investors that are utility shareholders, research and educational initiatives on gas safety, as well as hydrogen and biomethane, and strategy and support for legislative, regulatory, and grassroots climate and clean energy work. Okay. She has also contributed to national education and communication initiatives on climate finance with the Sunrise Project and partner organizations such as Amazon Watch and Friends of the Earth. Debbie grew up in Burlington, went away to school, and is now back. So please welcome Debbie New.
Thank you so much for having me here. My husband Jonathan served this church as an interim minister a long time ago. So it was fun to tell him I'm going to your old church. But also I did grow up in Burlington, and I'm here to talk about thermal energy networks, but I wanted to start by acknowledging that growing up in Burlington, Williston and Richmond were wonderful places to go with my family. And if you click the next slide, I want to share a memory with you and see who here remembers the same thing. If we go to the next one. Do you remember the roller rink? Oh my gosh.
I went.
Middle school roller skating in Williston was the thing. Yeah, were some of you there with me and I didn't even know it? Yeah.
I was.
Anytime songs from the 70s come on, I say, roller skating song, right? Oh my gosh. Yeah. So Williston and Richmond are wonderful towns, and yet towns across Vermont all have challenges these days. I don't need to tell you that. And at the state level, we have political challenges and dealing with flooding and other things like that on a statewide level. And there's a whole lot of uncertainty, as we all know, on the federal level. But there is something we can do here ourselves without waiting for others to catch up with us. There are places in this country that are sharing heat through thermal energy networks, and that's something that I want to focus on with you. Next slide. So Vermont Community Thermal Networks is an education and advocacy organization. I'm not a technical expert on this. I've learned a lot, but I work with technical experts, mainly from out of state, but we do have a lot of engineers and knowledgeable people here in Vermont. But we're working to bring this technology and this solution to Vermont. And next slide. We have a lot of state and regional partners who are very supportive of this work and are involved in it. So you may recognize on this list, when we see it, that there are people like at Efficiency Vermont and town energy committees and regional planning commissions that are all involved in this. So while my organization is small, it's a large network of people working on thermal energy networks. Next slide. So what we're really talking about when we talk about thermal energy networks is heat. And I don't have to tell you that heat in Vermont is a precious resource. We spend a lot of, next slide, we spend a lot of time, energy, and money trying to make heat, move it, and save as much of it as possible. But we're already producing a lot of heat that we're not using. Next slide. And what about cooling? We're going to need more and more of that, and many Vermonters don't have it. So cooling is also important. Well, we can have heating and cooling that leverages local resources and supports many local goals by using ground source heat pumps. Next slide. And that's what I want to talk about as the building block of a thermal energy network. So many of you are probably familiar with air source heat pumps. And some of you probably know a lot about ground source heat pumps, but I don't want to assume, so I'm just going to give the very basics. A ground source heat pump works a lot like an air source heat pump in that it compresses or rejects temperature from inside buildings and heats and cools them. So a ground source heat pump uses water instead of air and more moderate temperatures. So let's look at how they work in an individual home. If you're lucky enough to have one of these in your home, in the winter, the temperature comes in through water and pipes from outside the building, and the box in the basement, the gray box, compresses that. I think we're having a little trouble with the slides, right? So we'll just bear with the technology. So that box in the basement is the heat pump that compresses that temperature it receives from the water in the pipes and delivers that as heat inside the building. It also removes cool air and makes it warmer inside and keeps you comfortable. In the summer, the process reverses. So if you click to the next slide, we can see that the heat pump will remove heat from the building, providing cooler air inside. So that's how they work. In this case, the energy comes from water and pipes. And next slide, that is coming from the ground in many cases. And that's why people call it geothermal. But we're not talking about Iceland or geysers or the really deep hot rock stuff. We're talking about the fact that the sun warms the earth and the earth absorbs that temperature. So it's like a big solar battery. So we can harvest that temperature by drilling and creating what's called a vertical borehole. And we send a pipe down and back up with water in it so it can absorb that underground temperature. And in Vermont, year round, it's about 50 degrees underground. at about the depth of a water well, or even at about the depth of our water and sewer pipes. It can be quite warm under there. So so what this looks like is heat pumps, and here are some of those boxes. The first one is down at Hula on Lake Champlain, up in the ceiling. You can actually see them. The other one is in somebody's basement. They look a lot like a boiler. And next slide, the other big component are the pipes that go vertically down and up, and they can also go horizontally between buildings, and that's what we want to focus on. So durable plastic pipes of various diameters are what the other component. Next slide. And as I mentioned, these pipes can go horizontally between buildings in order to share heat between buildings rather than just trying to do one building at a time. So if you keep clicking another 2 clicks, we can see that we can start small, but then expand that network over time so that we can connect buildings with these pipes. Next slide. So the main source of energy, as I said, can come from the ground, and that's really important, but there are other ways we can harvest thermal energy, and one is from wastewater. I mean, think about it. We use a lot of water every day, and a good bit of that we warm up, and we pay to warm it up, and then we use it and we flush it down the drain. Well, that water leaving our buildings is at least 70 degrees in many cases, and we can harvest it at the building and reuse that heat in the building to warm more hot water without having to use gas or oil or propane. Or we can take that temperature from the sewer line, or even from a wastewater treatment plant, which is like a gold mine for heat. So there are many ways we can use wastewater to recapture, repurpose thermal energy. Next slide. The other place we can get heat is from buildings, big buildings that need to cool the inside, or from refrigeration systems. Think about your refrigerator or a grocery store. In order to cool things in all of those coolers or freezers in a grocery store, they have to take heat out. And right now, in most places, probably at Hannaford and Shaw's down the street, they're rejecting that heat into the air. So you can see the kinds of buildings that can reject heat into the air, but we can recapture that and repurpose it. Next slide. So this is what it could look like in a Vermont town. You can see the supermarket up here is capturing heat from the vents on top of the building and contributing that to the network. And a number of buildings are contributing wastewater heat. And then under the town green, there's a geothermal bore field with those vertical pipes. And so these buildings that need heating and cooling in different amounts at different times can share all of those resources. Next slide. I'm just going to take a break, some water. And you can click ahead. We can read through this together. Just to review, thermal energy networks use heat that already exists across a community, has already been paid for in many cases, would otherwise be discarded, and can be used efficiently. Now, I handed out a number of cards, and I think some of you have cards that say efficient, right? Yeah, there are a number of efficient cards out there. And let's talk about the why of this efficiency. Next slide. So an air source heat pump has to draw from the air. And the air in Vermont sometimes is 0 or below, or 90 or above now. So the air source heat pump has to work hard to provide something comfortable, like 70 degrees even inside. To go from 0 or 90 to 70 takes a lot of mechanical energy and also electricity. Next slide. Because a ground source heat pump draws from that 50-degree temperature, or if it's wastewater, or even 70 or above temperature, it doesn't have to work as hard to keep us comfortable inside, to get to 70 inside. So that means a ground source heat pump uses a lot less electricity. There's less wear and tear on the equipment, and the equipment lasts longer. And that translates into a lot of benefits for us, especially in terms of cost. Next slide. So speaking of benefits and the cards that you all have, or most of you have, I just want to run through this list of benefits really quickly because there are so many. So if you have a card, hold it up because I don't want to leave any of these things out. Okay, so I'm looking for safe. Safe is right here. Okay. The thermal energy networks are safe because there are no toxic leaks or risk of explosion from, because it's water and pipes. It's very safe. And who has healthy? Healthy's here. Okay. So healthy because nothing is burned inside. And we know that when we burn things inside, whether it's wood or fossil fuels, that releases toxins into our indoor air. But in this case, it's just water and pipes, and the indoor air is safer to breathe. What else do we have for cards? Clean, thank you. Because we're using water and pipes and just compressing or rejecting temperature, there are no emissions from this, no fossil fuels. The only emissions that we count as part of this is from the electricity that has to run the pumps. And so if your electricity source is clean, in other words, it comes from solar, then you can get very close to zero emissions, no greenhouse gas emissions in that case. What else do we have? Okay, resilient, thank you. Because the components are inside and underground rather than having compressors outside of buildings or tanks outside of buildings, they're very resilient, resistant to interruption from extreme weather events and other things like that. What else? Reliable, yes. So the ground is a constant source. We don't have to bring in fuels in order to run the system, but that energy is always there. Looking around, okay, flexible, right? So our natural landscape and our downtowns, how they look and feel is important to us, and being able to have these systems invisible means we can preserve the character of the natural landscape and the historic nature of our downtowns, like this beautiful church. Let's see, affordable. So this is something I want to talk in more detail in a minute, but there are ways to finance this system without upfront cost to customers. So that means that customers would pay regular monthly bills and they're predictable because they're not subject to fossil fuel prices and whatever is happening in Russia and across the world. Let's see what else. Accessible. This is a neighborhood scale solution, which means we're not just going one house at a time, and it depends on what I can manage in my home, what I can afford, or what you can do, or that kind of thing. It can be available to a whole block, to a neighborhood, and across a community. So that means more people can connect, and that makes it much more equitable. What else do we have? I think local, right? So because the energy comes from here, we can use the energy here and keep our energy dollars in our community and reinvest in what's going on right here, instead of sending our energy dollars out of state and benefiting large corporations. Did I miss anything? Just. Okay, so that is just in terms of justice and having a just transition off of fossil fuels. And because fossil fuel workers, whether they work for VGS as a gas company or an oil and propane company, they are plumbers and pipe fitters. And those are the skills we need in order to install and maintain these systems. So there are quality jobs for people who already have many of the skills needed. So that is very beneficial for all of them and for us as well as a community. Anything else? Okay, great. So I want to focus for a minute, next slide, on the savings that are involved in these systems. And you can see on the left the list of energy savings, and that relates to a lot of what I've already said. We've got no fossil fuels, high efficiency equipment, and that means less electric use and less demand on the electric grid. Because think about all the EVs and the air source heat pumps. We're trying to electrify a lot, and that means we have to build out the electric grid, and that translates into cost. So if you click to the next slide, the energy savings create cost savings here. Because with no fossil fuels, we have cost stability, as I mentioned, predictable bills. And with high efficiency, we have lower operational and maintenance costs for these systems and longer lasting equipment. With less electric use and not having to build out so much of the electric grid, we can have electric bill savings as electricity customers and as a state also. Next slide. So let's look at how this is possible. We're talking about infrastructure, and there are infrastructure investment companies, and yes, many of them are interested in Vermont, and they call me up and they ask about projects here. But a third-party company like an infrastructure investment firm, can develop, finance, construct, and operate one of these networks. And they're doing that in Europe, and they want to do that here. So next click. So that means that customers would have no upfront cost except for possibly a reasonable one-time connection fee to join the network. And then click again, paying monthly bills over a longer period of time, click again, allows third party to recover their investment over time. So this is the business model that we're looking at in order to make sure we don't have to use taxpayer money and customers don't have to shoulder the upfront costs. Next slide. So going back to the energy and cost savings, click again. That creates a whole lot of community benefits. And this is a short list of what I'm hearing from Vermonters is important to them. Economic development and downtown revitalization. If people aren't having to pay up front for this energy, then they can put their investments in other things. And affordable housing is a key example of that. And because there's so much resilience benefit from these, that's really important in Vermont as we see more and more flooding. Montpelier has a district system like I'm talking about. It runs a bit differently, but it did very well in the flooding in Montpelier. It experienced very little damage. So that's a great sign for us. And as I mentioned, we can have quality jobs in this work. Next slide. So this is shared infrastructure, and that's what makes thermal energy networks so attractive. Click again, because it's water and pipes, so it's a lot like our water and our wastewater departments in our cities and towns. We already have these utilities. We already know how to manage water flowing through pipes and delivering a shared service to customers. Next slide. The other thing about these is that thermal energy networks are something we can do right here, right now, with our businesses and our towns. They're actionable. Click again. And I just wanted to share what I've heard from some Vermonters about this. The technology is straightforward and well established. Small groups of people can actually do this. It's achievable. And I like that we're not just replicating something prepackaged. We're asking questions, learning, implementing it ourselves. Our town has agency. And I can tell you more about some of the places where these projects are developing and the kinds of people who are involved in doing this work. Next. As we explore thermal energy networks in Vermont, we're following a few simple principles. And the next slide after this, if you can go, yeah. And the first is start small and start early. We don't have to do this across a whole neighborhood right away. We can start with a couple or a few buildings. So this is an example. You can see the numbers. We're starting with number 1 and number 2, which are both municipal buildings, and we're going to connect them. There's an active conversation about this. Then there is a theater, number 3, and a couple of restaurants, 4 or 5, within this city block, small city block, and we can connect them through the parking lots and not even have to cross roads and disrupt traffic. So this is the kind of project we're looking at developing. There are lots of different examples of what we're trying to do, but if we start early, then we can integrate thermal energy network into what's already happening, because between 3 and 4 and 5, they're going to be replacing all the underground pipes there pretty soon anyway. It's the perfect time to do this, and that cuts the costs when you're already opening roads and digging. Next slide. Another principle is to contribute to local goals, and that has to do with the starting early, because thermal energy networks can benefit affordable housing and also wastewater and water treatment plants, expansion or upgrades that are necessary in many Vermont communities. So it's the perfect time to put projects together to create better financial benefits. Next slide. And the last one is to allow local control. So municipalities, because they have water and wastewater departments, they can also own and operate these. It doesn't mean they have to. There are many pathways to do this. Businesses could do this as a cooperative or as a local development corporation, and we can talk more about that. Next slide. So these ground source heat pump systems are working in Vermont, and this list, if you can read it, I'll read you a couple of them, is an example of where they're working and working quite well. There are only 2 examples here that are networked between buildings. The first 2, Hula on Lake Champlain and Champlain College, which I'll talk about in a second. But your Williston Public Safety Building reportedly has one of these systems, as does the new state police building south of 89, right?
Mhm.
So it's right here in Williston. I don't know about Richmond, but maybe you can tell me about that. But you can see here a whole variety of different places that have these systems. Their businesses, their farms, their schools, their municipal buildings. The National Guard has several of these systems at the airport and other places like that, Camp Johnson, because they have to electrify. It's a mandate, and they prefer these systems. Next slide. So let's talk for just a second about Champlain College. I grew up in Burlington, walking through the campus to and from school, so I'm very familiar with this. But they have built a whole lot of new buildings, and they've used that opportunity to install these systems and connect them to other buildings. But they also have a lot of historic buildings in that neighborhood that they use for offices and dorms and that kind of thing. And they retrofit those old buildings also to connect to this. So every time they redo a building or add a new building, they are connecting them to this network and hope to extend it across the whole campus. There are lots of campuses that are doing this. So this system has been operating since 2008, right there in Burlington. It's something that sometimes we can visit and get a tour of, which is great. Next slide. And I have one more example for you, which is not from Vermont, but it's a place that's a little bit like us here. It's in West Union, Iowa. It's a rural town, population 2,700. And they wanted to put a geothermal system in for their courthouse, which you see in the middle, and put the drilling into the green in front of it. Well, the businesses around said, we can't do that for ourselves. We can't afford it. Can you send us a pipe so we can be part of the system? And so they did. At the same time, they did a whole lot of street improvements because they were digging things up. And they have a much more vital downtown. It's a walkable community, and it's become very attractive for people all around. So this is a great model of what we can do. The businesses got together and they created an LLC, and the town leases the system to the LLC. So we don't have to get involved in all of those details, but it just proves that it's doable. Next slide. So I want to get back to where I started, which is that heat is a precious resource. We have the heat that we need. We have opportunities to harness it and repurpose it. And next slide. That brings us to Richmond. And we can come back to these slides if you want to talk about what might be possible. And next slide. Williston, maybe the undeveloped land behind Hannaford's. It's kind of hard to see these maps on the screen, but we could talk about where this might work in your community. So thank you so much for listening to all this information I've thrown at you, and I'm really eager to hear what your questions are.
Ready.
So Burlington is doing a lot of piping work right now. Are they involved in this?
Yes and no. They're redoing Main Street and they've redone Pine Street. If you've been driving over there, you know all about that, right? Those street improvements are not related to networking thermal energy. This is a newer idea in Vermont. What Burlington is doing, Burlington Electric, they're funding test boreholes, which is part of the project of developing a thermal energy network. And so they're using efficiency money that they have to spend to support this kind of energy to help to fund that important part of a project. So Burlington Electric is doing more than a lot of municipal utilities to support this, and they're talking about networking. So they've got a whole bunch of street work going on, and the idea hasn't caught up to that yet. So it's frustrating, but I think we still have a lot of opportunity there. Thanks.
Would you have to dig the streets up again if they decided to go that way?
Well, it depends where it is, because as I showed in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 example,
Right.
that's actually Middlebury around the library, just so
Okay.
you know. You can go behind buildings. And so you can get easements and rights of way from property owners rather than having to disturb a city street. Yes,
Do you have information on the type of cost savings that, say, a homeowner would see with this type of thing
Mhm.
versus the
Yeah.
cost to install?
Right, so I'm not that focused on residential because I'm starting with businesses in municipal buildings because that is where, that's the lowest hanging fruit. I think that's where a lot of the heat is. But we'd love to include residential as we go and extend pipes to people's homes. I can tell you a cost saving example that's been modeled by the experts I work with. If you have oil and or propane, and you switch to connect to a thermal energy network with all the costs included, then you can expect to see a 20 to 30% reduction in your bills, including your electricity bills. So oil and propane, getting off of oil and propane is the biggest savings. Getting off of gas is also a good idea and can save money over time as gas prices fluctuate and increase. And air source heat pumps. I didn't say this clearly before, but I should make sure I say to you that air source heat pumps are a really important technology. And we need to use them, especially in Vermont, where we don't have buildings close enough together to connect. So this is a solution for where there is density, and we're adding more density because we're adding housing and that kind of thing. But along a country road, we probably need a lot of air source heat pumps and quickly too. Yes,
So the power that's involved, I'm trying to get my head around this, is electricity. I mean, the system can't work
Correct.
without electricity.
correct.
If a residence had this, or even a municipal building, does their electric bill go up from what it was because of making the system function?
Yes. So if you're using electricity just for lighting and that kind of thing, and you're relying on a fossil fuel for heating, although fossil fuels can't deliver cooling, if you're using electricity for a window AC unit to cool or something like that, and you connect to a thermal energy network, you won't spend electricity on cooling, but yes, you can expect electricity prices to go up, but without fossil fuel prices, then your your energy bills overall can be the same or lower.
Net savings, yeah.
Anything else? I don't want to forget to mention that I threw a lot of information at you. On every table, there's a small sheet of paper that can direct you to the website that has a lot of information on it. And on the back of that, there is a link to the toolkit that we've developed with a statewide team to help communities get started on this. And over on the table here with Sally there's a lot of printed out fact sheets if you'd like to take anything with you. And please let me know if you want to continue the conversation about where you live, where you work, your community school, or talking with your municipality about what's possible.
Great, thank you so much.
I really appreciate Rotary, so thank you very much for your service. It really matters.
We have one more task.
Okay,
We'd like you to pick a ticket
thank you.
and
Okay,
read, and read the last three numbers.
okay, well, I'll need my
Put your
glasses.
on. Numbers are pretty small.
Yeah. All right, I hope I do right. This person, the last three numbers are 283.
Great,
Do we know who that is?
yep, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Thank you, and just so you know that, in thanks for your presentation, we will be making a donation in your name to the Williston Central School Mentoring Program.
Excellent, thank you so much. That really is a wonderful idea.
Thank you so much, Debbie. That's fascinating. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this technology goes.
Me too.
Yeah. I do have a heat pump at home and it's definitely better than being on fossil fuel. But I love the idea of having everything connected and sharing and recapturing heat. Like that's something I would love to learn more about, is like recapturing from hot water and the wasted water and stuff like that. I don't know if that's possible in a residence, but maybe we can talk more. Okay, I want to learn more. All right, fascinating stuff. And now Ellie, would you like to come inspire us?
Sure.
So yesterday I was at Hula for the Vermont Council on World Affairs they had a whole day on peace, recognizing the September 21st, which was the International Peace Day. Senator Leahy spoke, and he spoke about kind of the power of small community groups in making big international change. And he gave an example of a group from Vermont, Bridges for Peace, that ended up initiating talks between Russia and the United States back in the late 80s. And so I thought I'd learn more about that story and share it with you all. And unfortunately, I couldn't find too much about that actual story, but it led me to Governor Madeleine Cunan's inaugural address to the Joint Assembly from 1989, which references it. And it really struck me how, even though this speech is older than me, so much of it is still so relevant, and I found the words inspiring for today. So I'm going to read a couple excerpts from it. History is a fine teacher, and we can learn much about ourselves as we explore our colorful past, an adventure I encourage all Vermonters to share as we prepare to celebrate our bicentennial year in 1991. During our recent visit to the Soviet Union to establish a sister state, I thought about the very nature of our democratic system and why it has survived for 200 years. We are not very experienced in democracy, our Soviet hosts told us. I asked myself, what in our experience as Vermonters and Americans has enabled us to uphold democracy for 200 years? I concluded that strict adherence to some fundamental principles protected us from abuses of power. Number one, a respect for the rule of law. Number two, a government which administers the law in a responsive and fair manner. And three, a value system which is compassionate and respects the rights of the individual. In contrast to an authoritarian form of government, we constantly make certain that government exists to serve the people rather than having the people serve the government. That concept too was expressed to me as a new idea in the Soviet Union. As I compared their system to ours, as it is today, as it hopes to become, I concluded that above all, our form of government is distinguished by a basic respect for the dignity and worth of the individual and a belief in the perfectibility of all human beings. As we enter the next century, it will become increasingly important to reaffirm our democratic values, to express our humanity, and to recognize our interdependence on this planet. Vermont's 18th and 19th century isolation has ended, and we have become an inseparable, vulnerable part of the larger world. Increasingly, we find Vermont's triumphs and Vermont's problems linked with those people around the globe. Just as Vermont made the decision to link its destiny with the United States in 1791 when it joined the Union, today, Vermont must make a parallel decision to link our destiny to the world. We must be full participants in the new political, economic, and environmental structures which we are developing. 200 years ago, the threats to our existence were easily identifiable. Yorkers to the west and New Hampshireites to the east. Today's dangers are more elusive, but no less lethal. If we are to plan for the life in the next century, we must meet them head on. The greatest threats to the life in the 21st century are twofold: nuclear war and environmental destruction, either of which could make our planet uninhabitable. It will require both political will and moral force to achieve global agreement that the possibility of nuclear war is obsolete and the continued environmental degradation is intolerable. If the new dialogue between the United States and the Soviet Union contributes to this shift, the small state of Vermont can be proud that we have played a useful role in establishing international ties through individuals involved in Project Harmony, Bridges for Peace, the sister city of Yaroslav, and most recently, our mission to establish a sister state relationship with the Autonomous Republic of Karelia. The second threat to our existence is environmental destruction. Here also, Vermonters have taken the lead in enacting some of the toughest environmental laws in the country. But now we must take our case to a larger arena and demand prompt national and international action. Skipping a bit. Further, we can be a model state by acknowledging that our destiny is intertwined with others on this globe, dependent on decisions made far beyond our boundaries. And we can help shape these decisions as well by continuing to make our voices heard on issues of arms reductions, environmental agreements, and the emerging world economic system. What will Vermont be like in the year 2000? On this inauguration day, as we dream about the future, we feel confident that we have the capacity, the courage, the tools, and the imagination to shape the future. Our respect for human dignity, our allegiance to the rule of law, and our commitment to a fair government will help us to guarantee that Vermont will retain the qualities we admire most. Our fierce defense of the environment and aggressive determination to achieve greater economic opportunities for all its citizens.
Okay, so next week is our quarterly-ish business meeting, so I hope everyone will be there. And is there any other announcements or business stuff that we need to cover today? Nothing? All right, then Chris,
Oh, yes, I have some.
okay,
We've been asked if we could provide parking lot attendance on November 2nd. On November 2nd, there's a craft show at the Williston Central School, and they could use a couple people every couple hours to help with parking. Is that something that people would like to do? November 2nd, craft show at Williston Central School, parking attendance. Are there people who would like to participate with that? No, okay.
Well, I'll take that. Good morning. Most people know how much I detest the microphone.